Welcome to Podcast, the Business of Dentistry podcast, brought to you by Practice Plan. Podcast delivers the best business advice, real-life stories, and practical hints and tips to make your practice a more profitable and sustainable business. And now, here's your host.
Welcome to the podcast, the Practice Plan podcast. I'm Laura Hills, marketing consultant at Practice Plan, and today I'm joined by marketing expert Victoria Vickery, the founder of All Star Marketing Club. And today we're going to delve into the subject of marketing messages and biopsychology and what that means to your dental practice. So welcome, Victoria.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so Victoria, when we talk about biopsychology, what does this mean and why is this important to dental practices?
Yeah, so biopsychology is the behavioural processes that people go through when they're making a purchasing decision. And it's happening on so many different levels. So there's the emotional side to consider, there's the mental side to consider, but also it's the behaviours that they show as well. And if we can understand that, we can do a much better job of helping patients to make a decision based on our marketing activity and our marketing messages that we put in front of them. And it all sounds quite conniving, but it's not. For me, it's not about making people buy. It's more about understanding people better, recognizing that they may genuinely be held back by something and helping them to make those decisions and communicating with them in a much clearer way so that they can make confident decisions that are right for them.
Yeah, so you often talk about the 3 layers people move through when making decisions. Can you explain what those layers are and how they show up when a patient is deciding whether or not to go ahead with treatment?
Yeah, and this is one of the most useful things for practices to understand, actually, because we often assume that patients are making decisions only from logic, when actually there's much more happening underneath. And the first layer of that is what I call the survival brain. So this is the part that's asking, am I safe? Can I trust this practice? Am I exposing myself in some way to a level of risk? And in a dental setting, that can be things like the pain, the worry of pain. It could be the fear of cost. It could be the fear of being judged. It can be the fear of making a choice that's not quite right for them, or even worrying about whether or not that treatment might actually be worth it. And it's that part of the brain that feels uneasy. And if it does feel uneasy, it tends to pause and it doesn't move forward. Then you've got the second layer of the brain, and that's the emotional part. And as crazy as it is, that's the part of the brain that's actually responsible for decision making. And this is the home of things like trust, familiarity, confidence, and comfort. And it's often why a patient might choose one dental practice over another dental practice, even when, on the face of it, what they offer is exactly the same. Because they simply feel more reassured by that practice, they feel more understood, they are more comfortable with the environment, they might particularly like the dentist in the practice. So all of that comes into play with emotion. And then the third part is the rational brain. And this is where people will look for logical information that backs up the decision that actually they've already made within the emotional side of the brain. So they're going to want to understand things like costs and timings and processes and options and finance and aftercare and all of that stuff. But interestingly, that always comes after the emotional decision has already been formed. So the emotional side of what we do in our marketing and the messages that we put out there are really important for that very reason. So in practice marketing, if we only ever speak to logic, such as price list treatments and that kind of thing, and all of those technical details, we're going to miss out on those 2 other important layers. So patients, yes, they need to feel safe. It needs to feel right before they're actually even going to engage with logic. So part of the brain is asking, is it safe? Part is asking, how do I feel about this? How do I feel about this emotionally? And only then does the logical side come in. So in dentistry, before someone agrees to treatment, especially if it's higher value stuff, they're going to often be asking themselves things like, can I trust this practice? Is this going to hurt me? Am I making the right decision in the first place? Can I justify spending this money? And that is why biopsychology matters so much and why we need to think about it when we're putting our marketing together.
Okay, so why do some patients seem interested but then delay treatment or go quiet?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Very often, practices will assume it's about cost, when actually there's so much more that's going on underneath the surface. And we've got to take that silence as information, because very rarely have they gone completely cold and completely switched off from the need for that treatment.
Mhm.
They might be thinking, I just need a little bit more time on this to think about it. I feel unsure. I want to discuss it at home with my husband, wife, sister, brother, whoever it might be. I'm feeling nervous in some way. Or the other big one is they just don't feel like it's urgent yet. So, this is where practices really can improve on their messaging, because if they can actually get into the emotional reasons why somebody's not moving forward, they can start to tackle that within the messaging. Once you understand it, that means that we can communicate in a whole different way.
So you often talk about patients buying outcomes and not services. What does that mean in dentistry?
Yeah, patients rarely buy dentistry the way practices actually describe dentistry. And it's not unique to dentistry. This is for any business and any person. We really do buy transformation. So a practice might say Invisalign, whitening, implants, hygiene programs, but the patient is thinking confidence, they're thinking about comfort, they're thinking about avoiding the embarrassment of the smile that they're not happy with. They feel shy when they're smiling in front of photos. Um, they want to feel healthier. All of those things come into play. So it's not the service necessarily that they're buying. It really is about the outcomes that the treatments actually give them. So think about whitening. A whitening patient is not really buying the whitening. They're buying how they feel when they can smile more confidently next time they're out for a meal with their friends or when they're at work in front of clients. And an implant patient isn't just buying that technical procedure, they're buying confidence, they're buying function, they're buying normality again that perhaps they haven't felt for some time. So, if practices can explain those outcomes, it's going to make the marketing so much more relevant.
So what do you think it takes for a patient to go ahead and say yes to a treatment?
There's a lot, and we've spoken about quite a lot of that already. It's very much layered, as I say, but if there's one thing that I would say elevate this even more, it's familiarity. Familiarity is absolutely crucial because it's like the mere exposure effect. So, familiarity lowers perceived risk and makes us preference the things that we know of. So, people don't tend to actually act after one interaction. They need multiple touch points. And that might be social media, it might be email marketing, it might be that they've been onto Google and looked at reviews, it could be a conversation that they've had with a receptionist. So many, many different things. And every time they actually have that contact, we need to make sure that it's in a helpful and reassuring way, because that helps drop that risk factor that they might be feeling. So that familiarity really is important, and why continued momentum with marketing becomes crucial. So we're always front of mind, we're always there, they're always understanding who we are as a practice, what we stand for, how we can help them, and we really do become that practice that they favour because they've had exposure to us. But a patient who regularly sees helpful, reassuring communications begins to trust, and when the decision needs to be made, they're going to favour that practice because the trust has been built up.
Yeah. Okay. So if a practice wants to create more sales right now, what should they think about when it comes to buyer psychology and messaging?
Yeah, I brought together a model that is my 3 Ps, and it's pressure, progress, and potential. Each is a zone that a patient will be sitting in at any one time, but they can move. So the first P is the pressure zone. This is when something feels urgent. So this could be a patient that is in pain. They've got swelling, they've got a broken tooth, they're in immediate discomfort and it needs sorting now. They can't wait for it. It is a pressure. It needs to be absolutely dealt with. Then the second P is the progress zone. And this is when a patient might know that something needs improving, but it's not urgent enough for them to actually take action today. They will at some point in the future, but today is not the day it's going to happen. So this might be things like, oh, my gums are bleeding again. I must get to see the dentist at some point. It could be, oh, I really would like to overcome these crowded teeth that I've got in my mouth. My teeth are a bit discoloured. At some point, I would love to get them whitened and get that sorted out. So they intend to do something about it, but they often delay. And then the third P is the potential zone. This is all about future thinking. And this is where things like big smile improvements might exist, or big aspirations to improve the smile. The patient might like the idea, but because it's something that they're thinking about in the future, there is no way they're yet going to prioritize that treatment unless they've been mulling it over for quite some time. So practices need to be thinking about messaging on all three levels because not every patient is ready at the same time. And going back to your question, if we want to get patients in the door now, where do we actually need to focus? Well, the answer to that is we need to focus, for me, on the progress zone, because the pressure zone, they're going to deal with that anyway. If they've got, for example, a broken tooth or dental discomfort, they're going to come into the practice anyway. So I would recommend focusing on that progress zone, because they're going to buy eventually. They just need that push. So focus on messaging that is going to ensure that all of those things that they're intending to get around to, we're putting messages in their minds that put them at ease, take them through some of those biopsychology layers that I've explained, and help move them forward.
Yeah. Okay. So how should practices change their marketing because of this?
The biggest shift for me is to stop assuming that all patients are ready for exactly the same conversation, because they're not. Some need reassurance, some need more education about different treatment pathways, some have that urgency that we've discussed, and some just need help seeing what's possible. They might not even understand what's on the table for them to move them forward. And importantly, practices need to communicate beyond the appointment itself. We've got to be able to communicate with our patients outside of just when they're in the chair. And that's where email marketing can come into it. That's where content comes into it. That's where patient stories are key of other people that have been before them that have had those treatments too. And that's where follow-up also becomes incredibly important. So you're helping people process that decision, but over time.
Yeah. Okay. So if a practice is listening today and wants to take away one practical piece of advice, what would you suggest?
I would take one service that you want to grow and you want to bring in more business for, perhaps, and ask 3 questions. And those questions are, number 1, what is that patient actually really worried about? That's important because we can get into the emotional side of things then. And then secondly, what improved position does that service put them into? So going back to what I said around transformation, how do we take them from one state to another? And lastly, number 3 would be what might be stopping them from saying yes to it today. So really thinking about the objections that they're going to come up with and starting to answer that in your marketing. And if you can answer those 3 questions properly, your marketing then becomes instantly more powerful because you've adjusted it to exactly what the patient's thinking. And if you stop describing the treatment and start speaking to the real decision that's happening in the patient's mind, that's going to give a massive impact.
Absolutely. Okay. So finally, Victoria, can you give us some quick tips on biopsychology?
I can. So there's a few different things to think about here. We've already spoken about quite a lot on biopsychology, but if I would take you through some of the more well-known things that practices can start thinking about and bringing them into their own marketing, the first one's reciprocity. So this is the whole thing of when you give, you get. Many businesses use things like free samples or a free consultation. Many of them, many patients or many individuals are then compelled to give back. And you see this in restaurants. They bring out your meal, and what do they bring with a meal? A chocolate. Or if you're in an Indian restaurant, I've often had a shot of sambuca. So straight away, that increases the likelihood of someone tipping, which is interesting. So in practice, this could be something like a free consultation, an invitation to an open day, that kind of thing. Because if somebody takes that initial step forward, they are 5 times more likely to buy. And that is a significant number. Now, secondly, social proof. So we tend to trust products and services more if we've seen others that have purchased it previously, they've had success and they've benefited hugely from it. So think about reviews, case studies, before and after pictures. That's really important. That massively helps with biopsychology. Lots of practices are doing that, but it's something to really stay on the case with, because sometimes, we're all guilty of not asking our customers or our patients for those testimonials. So stay on the case with that because they really do work. And the third one is fear of loss. So this is often referred to in our marketing world as scarcity, of course, and the tendency to fear losing out on an opportunity can be way more than the tendency to want to gain something. So it's that FOMO thing, isn't it? Fear of missing out. And that's why marketing tactics like there's only 10 available now, or this discount is only available until this date, that's why those things work, because scarcity drives people. They don't want to miss out. And the last one I'll share with you is authority. So people want to feel confident that they're making the right choice. And they almost need us to say, yes, you're doing the right thing. So if you can demonstrate expertise clearly, that really does help the patient to trust more. And it helps to remove any doubt that is lingering around in their mind. So think about who needs to be showcased from your practice in the marketing to build that level of authority. And it might be that we have to get a few more people involved to make sure that the patient really does feel that there is that expertise coming through and that trust is building.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Victoria, for your insights. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.